So Richard was talking about about books as experiences, as books making the transition from an object to an experience that we really interact with. And I want to talk for a couple of minutes about our hunger for experiences, and especially experiences over things. Why do we want that? Now, what you see here, this image is from something called the Rain Room, which was installed at the Museum of Modern Art in New York about this time last year for several months. People lined up for hours to get into this. And what it was a room where it was pouring rain, throughout the entire room, except for the one space where you walked. And when you walked, the rain would part, and it seemed like a completely magical experience. Of course, it was actually done with sensors and software. But it was, if you'll pardon the expression, immersive. One of the things that has happened about immersive experiences lately is that JWT, the ad agency, a few months ago they announced their 10 trends for 2014. They do this every year. And immersive experiences they named as number one. Now, what you see here on the right is the result of a poll that they conducted, people 18 plus in both the US and the UK. And what you see is that by a large margin, millennials, just say people 18 to 35, crave actually sensory experiences and brands or products and the like that make an extra attempt to capture the imagination. What I want to do in this talk really is ask, what is immersion? How does it differ from engagement? Engagement I define as action. We're actually doing something. Immersion is more an experience of depth. We sink deeper into a story or a brand or whatever it is that we're dealing with. Now, there's nothing new about immersion. Before we had binge viewing, we had binge reading. And the first binge reader perhaps was Don Quixote, who lost his mind from reading too much and as a result went tilting at windmills. Several centuries later, J.A.R. Tolkien wrote a series of books that are perhaps among the most immersive that we've ever experienced. He not only created an entire world with The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, he invented languages for it. He was, of course, a linguist at Oxford at the time. This is in the 1930s and 40s. And in this little booklet on fairy stories, which actually originated as a talk that he gave at St. Andrews University in Scotland, he sort of lays down a few rules for how to create an immersive experience such as this, an immersive story. And he calls it creating a secondary world, a world that you can enter with your mind. And it can be as fantastical as you like. The only real requirement is that it has to be consistent. There have to be some consistent rules within this world, and you can't really break them. Now, what we have here is a look at a sort of a diagram, actually, of the ecosystem of stories that has sort of emerged lately. It used to be that we would read a book or any piece of fiction, a television series or a movie, and that would sort of be it. And that's not really the case anymore, because what's happened is the sort of passive version of immersion, which is to say we allow ourselves to be lost in a story, has been joined by a much more active form of immersion, which is to say we seek actively to go deeper and deeper into the story. People have always wanted to do this. It's the reason that we have fan fiction, and fan fiction has obviously been with us for a very long time, but now it's possible to do it in a number of different ways. And in order to sort of get at this, what you find is that as you get deeper into the into the immersive process, so to speak, you have a smaller and smaller part of the audience that's active in it, but they are more and more active in sharing details about it, often through Twitter and that sort of thing. As an example, I want to talk about The Walking Dead. How many people here are familiar with it or have seen it? Okay, so a fair number. It's basically a U.S. TV series, hugely popular, about an outbreak of zombie infection in Atlanta. As you can see from this poster, there are certain tips that you might want to keep in mind if something like this happens. First off, don't take the train, and whatever you do, don't take the freeway. Now, the thing about The Walking Dead, though, one thing about The Walking Dead is it's much more than a TV show. Okay. It's much more than a TV show. It's of course also the comic that the TV show is based on. But then beyond that, there's all this new stuff that's been created. Video games, mobile games, online videos, a novelization, and even AMC, the network that broadcasts this, has a zombie school for people who want to be extras on the show. So if you want to get on the show, you can go to Atlanta and sign up for this zombie school, and they'll tell you how to do it. Now, one thing, of course, that happens in this ecosystem is that there are certain fan activities that are not generated by the, by the network. Most typically, wikis. I mean, practically every TV show around has its own wiki now, sometimes 2 or 3 in the case of this one. But here we have a sort of a surprising example that really kind of breaks the rules, breaks the boundary between fact and fiction. This is an actual book, a textbook that was published on infectious disease modeling. And as part of it, Chapter 4, a group of researchers in Canada decided that they would do a mathematical model of a zombie outbreak, an outbreak of zombie infection. And as you probably know, zombieism is spread by being bitten. You die, and then you're reanimated, and you're very, very hungry for human flesh. So it's a very dangerous situation, obviously. And what these mathematicians in Ottawa discovered is that if you don't do anything, human life will be extinguished in about 4 days. If you quarantine the zombies, you have a little more time. You have 7 days. And the only way to effectively fight this is to hit hard and hit often, as they say, and in that way you at least have a chance. And remember, this is Canadians who are saying this. So now, one of the really interesting things about The Walking Dead is this study that was done by an outfit in New York called the Harmony Institute. Harmony took the first episode, the 90-minute pilot, and they broke it down scene by scene, the whole 90 minutes. So it's something like 286 scenes, and they identified each scene by who was in it, what was happening, and so forth. Then they went to Twitter, and they got all of the tweets that were sent out during that same 90 minutes that show was broadcast on October 31st, 2010. And they took those tweets and they divided them up according to how immersed people seemed to be in the show. If people were commenting on the acting or on some aspect of the production itself, they assumed that people weren't very actually involved in it psychologically. If people were tweeting about with an emotional reaction to something that was happening on stage, that was a different matter. So they mapped the tweets to the scenes on the show. And then what they did was they went to Columbia and they partnered with a couple of neuroscientists, and they got 20 people who had never seen the show before, but who matched the demographics of the original audience, which is to say, largely male and largely from New York or California or someplace like that. And they had them watch the show while wearing EEG skull caps, which essentially measure the electrical activity in the brain. And one of the great things about EEG from a researcher's perspective is that unlike other sort of ways of doing brain scans, fMRI for example, it's very, very precise in terms of time. You can tell right down to the second when people are experiencing some kind of brain activity. So they did that, and they mapped that to the tweets and to the to the scenes in the show. And what they found, not too surprisingly, was that most of the time, moments of increased brain activity, brain spikes, corresponded with moments that generated a lot of tweets. For example, this scene early on, this is about 5 minutes into the episode, and Rick, the sheriff's deputy, who's the main character, who of course we're just getting to know, finds himself in a gas station, and he sees this little girl from behind, and she's kind of shuffling along through the gas station, and he calls to her and tries to comfort her, and then she turns around and he sees that she's a zombie. So what he does is he pulls out his gun and he shoots her in the head. Now, this generates a great deal of brain activity and a great number of tweets. But interestingly enough, that was not always the case. There were some scenes that generated a lot of tweets, but very little, extra sort of, brain activity. And there were other tweets that other scenes that generated huge brain spikes, but actually not very much in the way of tweets. An example is this scene about, I think, 26 minutes in, where, again, Rick, this is an extended flashback that shows you how he got to the thing in the gas station. He's been wounded in the line of duty. He's taken to the hospital. He wakes up several days later and discovers that everybody at the hospital is dead, and the place is kind of a mess. So he staggers home, still in his undershorts and hospital gown, this is him entering his house. Moments later, he gets in. There's nobody there. His wife and his son are completely gone. There's no sign of them, and he's completely distraught. And he breaks down and starts sobbing. So this generated a lot of, shall we say, empathy, but very few tweets. Only 11 people tweeted about this scene. And to understand why, I think we need to know a little bit about what encourages people to, in this sense, share stuff, share information. There's a company in London called Unruly, and what they do is they work with brands to make videos go viral, both in terms of distribution and in terms of figuring out what's going to work and what's not. And they've come up with something like 100 different factors that have some importance here. But basically, they kind of boil down to 2 or 3. First is something that speaks to your sense of self. People share information because, whether they're consciously aware of it or not, because it says something about them. If you email all your friends cat videos, it says that you like cat videos. Whatever. But another factor is emotion, especially strong emotions like happiness, surprise, things like that. Even anger can work, but negative emotions like sadness and embarrassment are considered deactivating. So people don't share stuff like that very often. And I think most people watching this show found it intensely embarrassing that Rick would be in this situation. So if you want to look at how this concept of immersion came from, where it came from, and how it developed, I mentioned earlier on Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, but a real inflection point was this movie, which came out, of course, in 1977, and became a huge hit, obviously, but it wasn't just the movie that was a hit. George Lucas had a whole series of ancillary products that he did licensing deals with for, and nothing too unusual about that. But in this case, the comics, the action figures, eventually TV cartoons, all sorts of things, sort of fed into this world that Lucas had created more or less, actually entirely out of whole cloth. And what Lucas, the way he thought about this was the concept of, he had this concept of immaculate reality, which he actually borrowed from Kurosawa, which was, the idea behind it was that in order to make a completely made-up place look believable, feel believable, you had to provide so much detail that nothing was, essentially left to the imagination, that there was nothing out of place, there was nothing vague. And he created so much detail that it became possible to hang an entire series of stories, hundreds and eventually thousands of stories, onto this universe that he had created. One of the fascinating things about Star Wars, I think, is how influential it's been to an entire generation of Hollywood writers and producers. people like J.J. Abrams, Damon Lindelof, the co-creator with J.J. of Lost, Joss Whedon, who created Buffy the Vampire Slayer and a number of other shows. I spoke to a writer for Lost who told me that for people like these, Star Wars was sort of the gateway drug. And another person for whom it was a drug was James Cameron. Cameron was a bit older than these people. He was about 22 when Star Wars came out in 1977. He was, essentially a bit of a doper. He was driving trucks for a living and living in Southern California. He'd always wanted to be a movie director, but didn't quite get it together. Star Wars came out, and he got it together. In 2006, I was doing a piece for Wired on 3D, and of course, he had just invented this 3D camera system. I went to Montreal, where another director was making the first feature film using this system. Cameron was up there just to sort of watch and see how it worked. He didn't really have much to do, which was great, so I got a lot of time to talk with him. And we talked, among other things, about Avatar, which at that point was in development, was not yet greenlit, but it was clearly the next picture he was going to make. And when we talked about it, he didn't really want to talk about the plot. He didn't want to give that away. But he did tell me this. He mentioned this idea of fractal-like complexity and going deeper and deeper into the story, being able to go deeper into the story. And, for the casual fan, you could just see the movie and that would be enough. But for the real fan, you would want to enable them to go in an order of magnitude as much as they wanted, and the pattern would still hold. So I think that's really a key factor in this idea of world building and of immersive experiences. Now, it's not just entertainment stories that are involved in world building these days. Brands do it all the time. Kate Spade, for example, this is Kate and Andy Spade's living room today. 20 years ago, they weren't yet married. She was an ex-editor at Mademoiselle magazine. She had this idea for a line of handbags. They set up the company. They didn't have any money to advertise, but they did have something that was almost better than that, which is they had a story. They had a story about themselves and about the brand and who Kate Spade was. Again, they weren't married yet, so there was, technically speaking, there was no Kate Spade at this point. Everything that they did, every decision that they made went into this story. They didn't actually tell the story. They sort of just created it and let it be there for people to discover. It was all about, as Andy said recently, all about graciousness. Recently, the idea of world building turned up in London City Airport. This is a lounge that's just been opened a few weeks ago at LCY, which is the airport near the city and near Canary Wharf. Gets a great deal of business travelers going to other cities in the UK and to cities in the continent. So Bloomberg first thought they would just they would put some ads up the way people normally do. And then they realized, well, the lounge is kind of shabby, and why don't we create this world, basically? Why don't we create Bloomberg World for the business travelers who are, who go there? And that's what they did. They created, they put up these huge digital screens everywhere. They completely remodeled the place, of course. They put up digital tickers around the ceilings that carried stock quotes and other data. And they created a world. Now, I think one thing that is interesting to think about when you think about the idea of world building is that what you're really doing is you're creating a home for people. What Bloomberg did here was they created a place where you could, kick off your shoes if you wanted to, tap into the Wi-Fi, and join the information stream. Other people in other situations want to do something entirely different. Cameron created a world that became a home for the imagination, as did George Lucas, of course. But that's really what we're talking about. So if I want to sum up briefly, I'd like to say there are maybe 4 keys to creating an immersive world. The first is you have to have a story. But there's an important corollary to this, which is, as Kate Spade learned, you don't really have to tell the story. Often the most effective stories are the ones that we discover ourselves and that we tell ourselves. That can be the most powerful form of storytelling of all. Another is pretty obvious: authenticity. It has to be, the story has to ring true to, certainly if you're a brand and you're trying to do this, that's critical. Depth, as Cameron said, you want to be able to move in orders of magnitude, and the pattern will still hold. But another important corollary here is that the story has to work without that. Even if you don't do that, the story has to be fun for people who just want to see the movie. And finally, seduction. Advertising conventionally has worked in almost an assaultive form, certainly interruptive. And that's really not working anymore. People are increasingly, building up a filter to that and just completely filtering it out. If they don't skip the ads on their, DVR, they'll go to the kitchen or the bathroom or check their email or something like that when the ads come on. So this is really, these techniques that I'm talking about here are really emerging as a kind of alternative to that. And what brands and storytellers both need to remember is that they're creating a world that they need to create a world that speaks to the needs of their customers, of their users, of their audience, not one that that speaks to the need of the brand. That's what immersion is all about. And engagement is made possible by breaking out little parts of that world that people can share, share online especially. And the best way for this to work, when it works synergistically to sort of, deepen the human connection, not just with the brand or with the story, but with other people that we're sharing all this information with. So thank you.